Look, I think the market has just turned very negative very recently. It comes back to this GDP report. When I saw the 4.9% number, I mean, the thing that occurred to me, the larger theme is that there's such a divergence right now between Main Street and Wall Street.
Explain why the GDP is so strong right now. And that would indicate that the economy is strong. Therefore, stocks should go up, right? Why is that not happening? I think this is that's maybe confusing for people.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I can fully explain it because I think there's a lot of contradictory data. But if you look at Main Street, you're seeing 4.9% GDP growth. You're seeing pretty robust employment numbers. The consumer seems to be holding up. But if you look at Wall Street and the investment side of things, it's pretty miserable. The whole stock market this year is being held up by 7 stocks. The so-called Magnificent Seven is the top 7 tech names in the S&P 500. If you look at the overall S&P 500, excluding those names, it's flat for the year. And it's basically given back all the gains. And now those 7 names are starting to crack. So just in the last week
Google
or so.
and Tesla went down a bit, yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing them go down.
And Facebook,
And Facebook. So we're seeing, and then, Microsoft had a great quarter, but it's now down. It's given back that pop. So you're seeing that on the investment side of things, it's still pretty grim out there because people are now pricing in higher rates for longer. That's basically what's happening. And the thing I wonder about, here's the disconnect, is that ultimately what happens on Wall Street affects the consumer. Their 401ks go down in value. The value of their houses go down because now you can't, if you sell your house, you lose your 3% mortgage. Now you have to get a new one at 8%. So everyone stopped trying to sell their house. The number of real estate transactions has gone down a lot. That's gradually working its way through the system. So at some point, the consumer realizes that they're just not as wealthy as they thought they were. That's the wealth effect. And they just stop spending as freely. And we already know that credit card debt, and especially credit card servicing costs, are at all-time highs because of these high interest rates. So at some point, you just wonder if the consumer is like Wile E. Coyote and has gone off a cliff, but just hasn't looked down yet.
Yeah, just like the country, just like our government. It's like everybody's just spending and nobody's actually paying attention to the balance sheet, whether it's the government or individuals, apparently, because credit card debt's now at its highest and people are still YOLO. Is it because the only possible explanation with the consumer is that consumers' wages and the unemployment, the low unemployment, persistent low unemployment, the number of jobs available is just making everybody super confident. But that's got to end at some point, right? Doesn't it?
I think
if companies keep cutting their belts?
I don't think Wall Street and Main Street can be disconnected forever. I think it's got to reconcile one way or another.
Yeah, I agree.
So I would describe our economic situation as fragile. I think most commentators, like Bill Ackman, still thinks that things are going to turn south, that this GDP number is sort of a peak number. I don't know. Things still seem kind of shaky to me. And not exactly the recipe that you want when you have this massive geopolitical instability.
Yeah, exactly. That double whammy. And then plus the election coming up and the chaos that could cause in the country. It's kind of like that quote about going bankrupt. How did it happen? Slowly and then all at once. I think that's kind of what we're heading towards. This has been happening slowly, and then everybody's going to wake up with a heck of a credit card bill at 15 or 20%, and they're not going to be able to pay it.
Well, the government will have to intervene. They can't be in a situation where
I agree with Chamath.
A large percentage of the U.S. consumers just can't.
This is my point of view on consumer and all this commercial real estate and the bank loans. Eventually, the Fed monetizes all this stuff. It's the only path, which, by the way, will inflate a lot of financial assets. And if that happens...
And actually, you bring up another data point we haven't discussed, which is there's a major storm cloud out there, which is major U.S. banks are facing large unrealized losses. So Bank of America had unrealized losses of $131 billion on securities in Q3. JP Morgan Chase had unrealized losses of $40 billion in its held to maturity portfolio in Q3. And Citigroup did not disclose its losses for Q3, but it had $24 billion of losses at the end of Q2. So remember this dynamic that we had with SVB and all these banks back in, was it like March? Where all these regional banks were basically had these large unrealized losses, and then it created a run on a few of them. Well, now the biggest banks are starting to face that unrealized losses problem. Now, I don't think like Bank of America or JP Morgan or Citigroup are going to have a run on the bank, but they're clearly not doing that great. And at some point, there's going to have to be a reconciliation of that.
Unless they hold it to maturity, I guess. We should do